A fatal flaw across Iowa. People in crisis without EMS to help.
The biggest surprise to us was the fact that no one did show up.
Understaffed, underfunded, and under pressure.
You could snap your fingers right now and say, here's $1 billion. We still aren't able to provide statewide EMS coverage because we don't have the people.
KCCI investigates what Iowa counties are doing to make sure an ambulance will be ready when you need it.
A week of special coverage starts Sunday at 10.
It's been therapy for me to help get us through this.
Donna Hansen keeps her husband, Tim, close to her heart.
It's been almost 6 years, and still some days it still doesn't seem like that happened.
The day his stopped beating.
Heart attack. Yep.
Is one her daughter, Kim.
I try not to remember that stuff.
No, I know.
July 30th, 2016, Tim had chest pains, told his daughter to call 911. Donna, not home at the time. Instead of waiting for the Hudson Volunteer Ambulance to come to them and take them to the nearest hospital 12 miles away in Waterloo, they had a different plan.
He told me, call the fire department again, tell them we will meet them there.
Once they got there, a firefighter and a police officer were at the department, but no EMT.
Once we saw our friend pull up, who's the firefighter, I'm like, is anybody coming? What do I do? Are you gonna take him? And no, there's nothing I can do. I'm getting on the phone. I mean, he was making the calls trying to get people there. Nobody.
With no EMT and no one to help, Kim decided to keep driving to a Waterloo hospital.
I knew when it had turned worse, when he reached out and he didn't say anything. And all I could say was, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna get help.
She eventually met a full-time Waterloo ambulance along the highway. Tim died 5 miles away at a local hospital. His story of an ambulance or EMT not showing up is more common than you'd think.
The biggest surprise to us was the fact that no one did show up, because when you call 911, you always expect that that's going to happen.
When you call for police or you call for fire, you're going to get police and fire because it's mandated by Iowa law. EMS is not.
The service is not essential in Iowa, meaning if you need an ambulance, one is not legally required to show up.
I think the pandemic.
Senate File 615, signed into law by Governor Kim Reynolds last June, provides the framework for counties to deem the service essential. It also allows them to create a referendum to raise property taxes to fund EMS.
Since 1979, since EMS was on the books, it's the first time that we've ever seen the words EMS and essential in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, in the same bill. So it was a huge step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction, but money and an essential service are not the complete answers to the problem.
I just helped to sign the Bridgewood.
According to the Iowa EMS Association past president Mark McCulloch.
You could snap your fingers right now and say, here's $1 billion. We still aren't able to provide statewide EMS coverage because we don't have the people.
Which takes us back to the day Tim Hansen died. Not enough volunteers were available when his heart stopped.
We've never put blame on anybody
No.
for any of this.
No blame, just remembrance and awareness about a fatal flaw across the state.
It started out as the shock that we had that no one showed up because they didn't need to.
Now, all week, we'll introduce you to Iowa counties working to make EMS essential, and we'll show you the exact process of how that happens. Plus, the one county that did it before the law was passed and how it's working now. And that staffing shortage you heard about, a problem virtually every field. How are emergency services recruiting workers while trying to take care of an aging population? Finally, we look to ask the people in power, what is the solution to all of this? Essential, a KCCI investigation started tonight, airs every day this week on KCCI 8 News at 6. This is Harrison Smith. He's no longer with us. He died due to an allergic reaction to tree nuts in early 2020. It took an ambulance 18 minutes to get to his house because there was no closer unit. His mom now and the director of public safety in Van Meter want to make sure this never happens again. A mother's love knows no end.
He was very driven to be successful, and he cared about other people.
even when the end has already come.
He enjoyed everything. He loved sports. He really loved basketball, and then he kind of gravitated towards baseball, and he still liked them both. He liked to try new things.
Harrison, a senior at Van Meter High School, was allergic to tree nuts, but hadn't had a reaction for years.
He ate something, he felt strange, and came home and tried to handle it on his own. He called 911, we think, immediately when he got here.
While he called 911 immediately, an ambulance that could save him did not come immediately. It took 18 minutes to get to his home south of Van Meter.
He called 911 and thought it was going to save him, and it didn't.
The reason is something that Mother Melanie learned while her son's life was on the line.
Part of us, we don't feel like the people that were here failed Harrison, but the system we feel like failed Harrison.
Here's how the system worked then and still does now in this area. When Harrison dialed 911 while having that allergic reaction, 3 EMS services were called. Van Meter, Dallas County Ambulance, and Adel were both dispatched immediately. A Waukee ambulance was called about 10 to 11 minutes later to see if it was closer than the Adel ambulance. Van Meter Police Chief and Director of Public Safety William Daggett and his department investigated the call after.
It took 17 minutes for my first response unit to get there, and like 17 and a half, 18 minutes for the ALS unit to arrive.
That 18 minutes is still within Iowa's EMS system standards, which says you should expect an advanced life support ambulance within 20 minutes if you live in a rural area. Chief Daggett says that is incredibly too long to wait for an ambulance to show up. Van Meter has a basic life support ambulance, EMTs who can do first aid and CPR, but do not rise to the level of paramedics or an advanced life support ambulance.
When you call for our rescue unit, we're going to be able to put bandages if you're bleeding. We're going to be able to stabilize your neck, do basic first aid.
Dallas County Ambulance and Adel and Waukee are both advanced life support ambulances. Basically, what you picture an ambulance to do, they can do it. Everything to save a patient while taking them to the hospital.
If you're in trauma and in pain, that's the people that can do the advanced life-saving stuff.
Dallas County paramedics were the ones who took Harrison to the hospital, where he took his last breath.
On a nice day coming down the hill to our house, we can see sometimes Des Moines from here, and we can't get an ambulance, here before 18 minutes.
Chief Daggett says it boils down to EMS becoming essential in Dallas County. The Iowa law passed last year allows counties to deem it essential, take it to the voters for a referendum to raise property taxes to properly fund the service, which, according to Chief Daggett, would put an advanced life support ambulance in Van Meter.
My deal has always been, why do the citizens that don't live in the 2 metro areas in Dallas County or in Waukee, why don't we get the same service as these two? And it's because as little brothers, it's all about funding, being an essential service. And it's the only emergency service that's not essential.
No county has deemed EMS essential and taken the tax referendum for a vote following the law's passage, though some are in the process. Smith and Daggett believe a statewide determination to make EMS essential is the solution to saving more lives.
The people we depend on to save our lives are not seen as necessary by the state, by code.
It needs to be essential, and we don't want to see anybody else have to suffer or go through the grief that we've had to go through.
Now, Daggett requires all of his fire and police personnel to be certified EMTs, his way of making sure his department is prepared as possible because he doesn't have that ALS ambulance in Van Meter. 40 EMS departments have either 1 or 2 people on their rosters, according to data that we obtained from the Iowa Department of Public Health. Take that a step further. 5 of those have just 1. Perhaps it makes sense, though, to have 1 in the Buchanan County Sheriff's Office, or maybe just 1 at Riverside Casino on the east side of the state. But the other 3 are rural Iowa towns with just 1 person there to respond. While those volunteers keep departments open, more than a dozen have closed in the last 2 years because there's simply no one left.
There was no one to take over.
The ambulance barn is still connected to the fire station in Allerton, Iowa. The sign still on the garage door.
It was hard. It was a hard decision.
But the service itself is no longer running. Becky Heisel was the head of the Allerton First Responders up until she decided on the department's final curtain call. January 7th, 2020, she called the state to let them know the 30-plus year service was closing.
They were really, really heartfelt about closing down because they know how important those are.
A town of roughly 500 that once took pride in the number of EMS volunteers, down to just 1 and 2 nurses to help out, until that last volunteer had health troubles of her own.
I had a heart attack and ended up having to have 5 bypasses. I didn't have the strength anymore. And, it was really tough to make that decision.
Now, Allerton is covered by EMS at the nearby hospital in Corridon, about 6 miles away.
Even though the response time may only be affected by a couple of minutes, it's still, you still have that concern.
Allerton is one of 16 EMS departments across the state that have closed since the start of 2020. From here to Havelock to Nashua to Montrose to Menlo and more, no part of the state is immune to the issue. 14 of those closed due to lack of personnel. Tiffany Bowles is keeping the doors open at the Kellerton EMS.
Well,
she's the only emergency medical responder in the Ringgold County town of a couple hundred.
all of the trauma dressings, oxygen, tubing,
This go bag replaces the outdated ambulance that sits in the garage.
syringes can be used for a lot of different things.
She keeps it with her so she can respond before the Ringgold County ambulance, about 10 miles away. Why not take the ambulance?
It would take me longer to get it started than it would be for me to get my vehicle there. And by the time that I would get there, the ambulance would probably be from Ringgold County already there.
That Ringgold County ambulance is stationed where Bowles works at the county hospital. Her coworkers there asked her to become the first responder to keep that service open.
Compassion, I don't know. That's one thing that's kind of built into all nurses.
Bowles is able to become an emergency first responder with her certifications as an RN, but she says with another few classes, she can become an EMT. Right now, she provides medical care until that Ringgold County ambulance can show up.
If I was able to get there in a shorter amount of time, or anyone who was able to get there in a shorter amount of time and able to save it, because a lot can happen in those 10 minutes.
Even though that old Ford ambulance hasn't been out in a call in a while, it's Bowles who keeps the service running.
You don't have to be in that or know anything about it just to be a volunteer. Just go and show up, and someone else is going to be there to be able to help.
Just show up to keep the doors open, the service is running, and the community's safe.
It's important for people to get involved in their communities. That's how we stay alive.
Tower 915, ambulance 913.
The calls
Ambulance 213, motor vehicle collision.
are constant.
Our ambulance will lift you right in.
No matter where you are in the state, from West Des Moines to Van Meter to Tripola to Des Moines.
03's on scene.
But the number of EMS workers to respond to them
We'll be responding to that.
is dwindling.
EMS is a tough sell.
Paid or unpaid staff.
I don't know of anybody that's got an abundance of volunteers.
Across the country, turnover is about 20 to 30% annually, according to the American Ambulance Association. Let's start on the volunteer side.
Right.
Kip Ledecky has seen the number drop firsthand as the head of the Tripola ambulance and the emergency management coordinator for Bramer County in northeast Iowa.
Bramer County, like most of the small counties in the state of Iowa, especially the rural counties that depend on volunteers, we're struggling.
Struggling so much, Tripola Ambulance has one volunteer who helps with coverage of 40-plus hours a week, while the other volunteers work their day jobs.
There's usually never anybody other than me around.
Steve Hill is that one volunteer. He retired from Nestle after 25 years. Now he has a full-time volunteer job for the ambulance service.
7 years of being retired and then being here during the daytime.
You just sweat bullets when he's gone. Because who's going to pick up the slack? If the city of Tripola and Tripola Ambulance Service did not have Steve around, I would not be surprised if we would be forced to close during the day or to hire somebody to come in.
While Steve may sound like the Tripola daytime guardian angel, his story is common in the state. Small-town ambulance services are struggling to get volunteers. In north central Iowa, Wright County feeling the same pinch.
It's hard to get people to volunteer for EMS. You know, the training takes a while, the hours you need to keep to recertify take up time, and you know, everybody just seems to be busier.
At the state's largest department, Des Moines Fire, recruitment numbers have dropped over the years, registering the lowest number of applicants in the last 6 years this spring, with 394. Which is about a third of what they once were.
Correct.
According to Percy Coleman, Chief of Operations at Des Moines Fire.
Over time, we've seen our applications, drop. Traditionally, there was a time we had a hiring process, we would have 1,200 applicants.
These applicants are for firefighting positions. Des Moines runs EMS through its fire department, so every firefighter must become a paramedic and has the chance to work on an ambulance if they want.
We're competing with the other agencies in the metro area, and we're competing against agencies across this country.
Departments are also competing with other jobs in today's workforce shortage.
We're competing against all other trades, and these other trades, many of them have better hours and pay better. Have gone available.
Mark McCulloch is the immediate past president of the Iowa EMS Association and the current legislative chair.
You could snap your fingers right now and say, here's $1 billion. We still aren't able to provide statewide EMS coverage because we don't have the people.
The state does not keep track of the number of EMS workers over time, so it's hard to tell the exact number of workers who have left the profession in recent years. Iowa Department of Public Health did provide these numbers of EMS workers based on the counties they live in. You can see rural counties have the lowest number of workers, particularly in southwest Iowa. Ringgold, Adams, Clark County all have 15. Monroe, 21, Wright, Audubon, and Adair have 23. These counties with the lowest numbers do have some of the lowest populations, and an ideal number of EMS workers is hard to figure out. Though across the state, leaders say numbers are dwindling. While the reason is tough to pinpoint, McCulloch has several ideas.
EMS is a tough sell. We work long hours, tough hours, nights, weekends, holidays. We see desperate situations. We're thrown in the middle of those. We try to do our best, but it's a very stressful job.
But there isn't just one solution to the recruitment problem and to get more people into more ambulances to help communities. But it can be broken into a few areas, according to McCulloch: pay, support, and identity.
We really need to take a good hard look at what we're asking our providers to do and pay them accordingly.
For volunteers, he says they need to find a way to subsidize or incentivize being a volunteer and support all EMS workers with what to expect from them.
We need to make this a livable profession. We cannot expect our responders to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week.
The calls coming in won't stop.
Incident assigned.
And neither will those responding to them. But the servant's heart can only go so far if there are only so many.
We saw a train wreck coming, and we just wanted to divert that as quick as we could.
That train wreck being?
These cities not be able to fund EMS.
Wright County is serviced by 5 EMS departments, and without the county deeming it an essential service.
Any of the cities could come out and say, Supervisor, we're not able to service your rural community anymore.
The problems led to solutions in Wright County. County leaders formulated a plan to get the necessary funding to the ambulances themselves. The Board of Supervisors, deemed EMS essential, created a referendum to raise property taxes to fund it. The voters overwhelmingly passed that referendum of 67 cents per $1,000 of assessed property tax value to generate $586,000 each year to Wright County. But the supervisors didn't create a county ambulance service. Instead, they created a fund to distribute money to each city based on its response area.
You have to have everybody on board.
All run by EMS coordinator Brian Jensen.
We were a great benefit that the supervisors did, declare us an essential service, and it has helped us.
It has also helped with equipment, vehicles, training, and staffing.
It's allowed the agencies to pay their people more, so help with retention.
Plus, it funded this new quick response vehicle, staffed by a paramedic at the Iowa Specialty Hospital in Clarion.
It is available to all the outlying services in our county to use if they need some advanced level care.
Now, Wright County has become a model for other counties in the state, even helping others to navigate Iowa's new law, which allows counties to deem services essential to increase funding.
Our problems are in Wright County, may not be the problems in the county next door, but you're able to write the rules in order to solve the needs of your county, and that's what's great about that chapter in the code.
Now, so far, only a handful of counties have explored and initiated that essential process. Important to note here, Wright County raised its property tax for essential funding with a referendum before that 2021 law was signed. So far, Helgevold and Jensen say the program is working well, though it does have a 5-year sunset on it. So after 5 years, it will require another referendum vote. It's currently almost 3 years into implementation. And Steve and Stacy, the problem, multifaceted, but everyone agrees a recently passed bill is a step in the right direction. Some say it doesn't quite go far enough, while others say legislation isn't the only answer to strengthening EMS and getting more workers out in the field.
Tower 915, ambulance 913.
We've introduced you to a lot of problems this week.
Our ambulance will lift you right in. EMS is a tough sell.
Staffing.
It started out as the shock that we had that no one showed up because they didn't need to.
Funding.
There was no one to take over.
And closing EMS departments. But how about a solution from EMS experts across the state? The current solution? A bill signed into law by Governor Kim Reynolds last June.
It's the first time that we've ever seen the words EMS and essential in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, in the same bill.
The law allows County Board of Supervisors to deem EMS essential, take a tax referendum to the voters of the county, and if that passes with 60% of the vote, they can use that tax to fund emergency medical services. While no county has passed it yet, several are in the process, including Bremer County.
We're struggling.
But it's a tricky process, according to County Emergency Management Coordinator and Tripola Ambulance Director Kip Ledecky, who says ambulance districts blend through county lines across the state, which he says begs this question.
Should the taxpayers of a county that have passed it be subsidizing EMS in a county that hasn't passed it?
Ledecky and others in the county are working to at least get the money they need locally now.
99 different ways of 99 different patches, if every county participates.
Ledecky wants EMS to be designated essential across the state.
When we went around the state, one of the things that we're pleading for is we've got to have a minimum level of EMS across the state with sustainable funding.
I don't know.
Melanie Smith agrees.
We don't want to see anybody else have to suffer or go through the grief that we've had to go through.
Her son Harrison died of an allergic reaction to tree nuts. It took an advanced life support ambulance 18 minutes to get to him.
I just think it's a big deal for them to maybe take the next step and make it essential throughout the whole state.
I've gone available.
An essential service across the state would mean an ambulance would be required to show up anytime you dial 911. Where that funding would come from is anyone's guess.
We've never had anybody say they disagree with us. The issue is, even you may agree with us, but how are we going to do this? It's going to take money and it's going to take people. And right now, I don't know how that's going to happen.
Even if the funding backed up the essential service, providers say they're not sure the state would have enough EMS workers to keep up.
Our legislators could say, yep, EMS is essential statewide. Here's $1 billion, whatever it costs, right? Money's no object. Sure. We still don't have the providers to provide the coverage.
Which is fixed, according to McCulloch, by giving EMS an identity, having more competitive pay, and supporting EMS workers.
We really need to take a good hard look at what we're asking our providers to do and pay them accordingly.
There's not that much in here.
For volunteers, he says they need to find a way to subsidize or incentivize being a volunteer and support all EMS workers through what to expect.
We need to make this a livable profession. We cannot expect our responders to work 60, 70, 80 hours a week.
We'll be responding to that.
The alternative is fewer employees, fewer volunteers, and less help to serve you when you dial 911.
It's important for people to get involved in their communities. That's how we stay alive.
A lot of problems adding up to one big one that could impact your family when you need help. Now, important to note here, none of the families we talked to who lost their loved ones were bad-mouthing EMS or the workers in it. They all support the workers who tried to save the life of their loved one. But they tell me the system is broken. They want to see that fixed. They want a properly funded essential EMS service across the state of Iowa.
Roger Gens has heard the calls for EMS on his scanner.
They'll call Grafton a half a dozen times or Kensett a half a dozen times. And then finally they'll say, well, get a hold of Northwood.
He's dialed 911 for EMS himself, but a call he made this spring is one that's become all too common in Worth County. His daughter Brenda had kidney failure and a minor stroke while at his house in Northwood.
Then we called the rescue 911 and we waited, and I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. It seemed like an hour, you know, of course, when you're waiting. You would kind of watch what she was doing, and you'd come out here and you'd look around and wonder, where are they, and go back, you know, and get excited.
After waiting and no one showing up, Brenda's sister rushed her to the hospital in Albert Lea, Minnesota, a 16-mile drive. After they left, Gens went to the fire station and found 2 firemen.
They were fairly new firemen that really hadn't had the schooling and stuff, so they were kind of waiting for one that was qualified.
He says he doesn't blame the volunteer system.
And as far as I'm concerned, we've got the finest fire department in Worth County and Iowa.
Brenda is okay today, but still has minor complications from the stroke. More and more calls are going unanswered because of fewer and fewer volunteers.
There's a 1 in 4 shot your first responders are not going to show up.
AJ Stone is a volunteer EMT and firefighter at nearby Manly Fire and a Worth County supervisor.
Very scary. I mean, you know, I've lived in this town my whole life. I know a lot of people in this town, and I hate to ever see somebody suffer or pass because they couldn't get help fast enough.
In those missed calls, even if a volunteer EMT doesn't show up, a transport ambulance from nearby Mason City will. But that takes time. Carl Genap is the deputy chief of EMS in Mason City.
Worth County in general has an average of 20 minutes and 13 seconds to get to the scene.
Even if a Worth County ambulance from Manly, Northwood, or any surrounding town shows up, they can't legally take someone to the hospital.
We are actually a paramedic level service. We just don't transport. So as long as we have a paramedic on that call, we can administer necessary drugs needed until the ambulance would get here.
So if a Northwood EMT did show up to Gens's call, it would still take a Mason City ambulance roughly 30 minutes to drive the 22 miles.
By the time they call 911, it could be an hour or more till they are actually in the ER. The clock moves very slow. You know, you ask somebody what time it is multiple times, and it seems like 10 minutes have went by and it's been 2 minutes.
But they are working to change that by deeming the service essential and raising taxes to properly fund EMS. The county board has until the end of August to figure out how much money they'll need.
Once people realize what little bit of money it is going to cost them to get that service, I think they're going to be okay.
All so calls won't go unanswered like the Gens family experienced.
And I think most of the people, for what it'll raise our taxes, isn't going to bankrupt anybody.
You think it's worth the money, basically?
I think it's worth the money.
James Stratton, KCCI 8 News, Iowa's news leader.